going to tie another wet fly today. This is the apple green. This fly also is in Ray Bergman's book Trout. Not much information that I found on this fly. There's some different ways that people tie it, but this is tied basically the same recipe as what is in the book. I like this pattern. I've never fished it, but I like the look of it. I like this simple little wet flies, and I also kind of like these flies that they use a floss for the ribbing because I like the contrast and the color, but I also like the look of that rib. It gives it a little bit more depth. Anyway, this is a very simple fly, nothing complicated about it. You could just use some regular old brown hackle for this. I'm using some strong rooster and some Schlappen and some natural gray mallard wing for the wing of the fly. And that is the apple green. I'll go ahead and get started. Begin the apple green by placing my hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 33.99 in a size 8. Going with a little bit smaller hook on this. I think I'm going to take this out and do some trout fishing. Debarb the hook. I'll attach my thread. Because I have even though it's a dark green floss body, I'm still going to go with a white 6/0 Danville, just so that I don't darken up that green too much. Attach my thread about an eye length behind the eye of the hook, running my thread down the shank, just getting a nice base layer of thread on there. There is no tip or tag on this, so I'm going to run my thread pretty much down to the barb of the hook. The tail on the apple green is brown, and I'm actually using this is a brown strong rooster. Now I'm going to use Schlappen for the throat, but I'm going to use the strong rooster because the barbs don't have as many barbules. So they're a little spikier, or just a little bit, for me, they just represent the tail a little bit better. Select a feather. I'm going to peel off the fluff. I'm going to get, I don't know, maybe about a dozen, 15 barbs off to the side. I want to pull those perpendicular to the rachis so that all those tips are evened up. Those are all nice and even. And I'll peel that off, and I'll tie in the tail. I want the tail to be a shank length long, maybe just a little bit longer. Tie that in, wrapping down, making certain that the very end of the body is going to be just about to the point of the hook. If these butt ends extend past the body length, you'll want to trim those. Now, the apple green has a Kelly green flossed body, and I'm going to use a 4-strand Rayon, Danville Rayon for the Kelly green, and it has a yellow floss rib. I'm using a 4-strand Rayon in yellow for the rib. So I'm going to tie the rib in first. I want the rib on the underside of the hook shank. You can trim away the excess there. That's longer than the body. I'll get one wrap in there just to kind of make certain that's held in place. By the way, out of the 4-strand Rayon, I'm only using 2 strands for the rib. If this fly were a little bit bigger, I might use 3. But on a size 8 hook, I'm just going to go with 2 strands, and I'm using all 4 strands of the Kelly green floss for the body. I'll tie that in, bringing that back to the length of the body, and then advance my thread forward. This just collects the floss and the tail, all the components up under the body, so I'll have a nice smooth body. Occasionally I want to put a little bit more wax on my thread. Stop about an eye length behind the eye of the hook, and I'll take my green floss, I'll wrap it in, and then I'll put in the rib. For the rib, if you wanted, you could have it go in flat. I like to twist it up, so I'm going to give it a strong clockwise twist, and that's just going to make it have a little bit more of a corded look. Rib tied in, I'll now change over to my black thread, which I'm going to finish the fly out with. This is just a black Danville 6/0. I've already waxed the thread. So the throat is also just a brown hackle, and as I mentioned before, I'm going to use Schlappen for this, which you could, there is some differences obviously between the Schlappen feathers and the strung rooster. The barbs on these have many more barbules, makes them what people call webbier or fuller. They flow a little bit more, they're not quite as stiff. I like those for the throats, but I'd rather have for the tails, the thinner barbs. So just like the other feathers, what I did with the tail, I'm going to strip away the fluff on these. And actually, I strip a little bit of that away, and then I just cut the rest of it off. Then I'm going to take a little from each side. It's up to you. It depends on how full you want it. Just like before, I'll even the tips of those, and I'll peel those off, and then I'll get some from the other side and match those up. I'll end up with a nice little slip of Schlappen barbs for the throat. Place this underneath the hook. I like the tips to go back to about the barb. And I'll tie those in. And the apple green is a very simple fly, as I had mentioned. It's uncomplicated. It has standard parts and everything of a wet fly, but it's just very uncomplicated. The wing on the apple green calls for slate. And generally that means a gray, kind of a darker gray. I'm using some natural mallard light feathers because they just have a nice natural gray color. I'll get my right and left. I'll match up the tips on those. Once I have the tips matched up like this, I'll double check the width. The one on my side's a little wider, so I'll reach in with my bodkin and I'll peel out about 4 of those to even those up. So now my tips are even. They're both the same width, which is going to be anywhere from 3/4, half the gap to maybe 3/4 of the full gap if you want a little bit fuller. I want the tip of the wing to come down about halfway down the tail. Holding those together, I'll use a pinch and loop or a pinch wrap. Bring those down, another pinch and loop to secure. And then I'll put in 2 or 3 wraps to make certain that those are nice and secure. Looking at my wing from both sides, looks pretty good. I'll trim away the excess. Bringing my thread up behind the eye of the hook and working my way backwards to tie in all the butt ends of those barbs for the wing, as well as to shape the head, cover everything up. I'm going to flatten out my thread here. I give my bobbin a counterclockwise twist, and I use the hook on my whip finish tool to help smooth the thread out. What this does for me as I'm putting in my whip finish, it helps to fill in the cracks, the grooves, and everything from the thread just to smooth it out. It also might cover up any little bits and pieces I didn't get covered, and it just puts kind of the finishing touches on the head of the fly. With the whip finish in, I can cut away my thread. Drop a head cement on both sides. That will soak right down in there. And in a moment, I'll come back and put some black lacquer on that. And our apple green is done. As I said, it's just a nice, simple little wet fly. There's not much to it. You could use the Schlappen for the tail if that's all you have, or even you could use the strung rooster for the throat if you wanted to. But I'm kind of drawn to these little wet flies that use floss for the ribbing on them, and they're just kind of simple. There's not a whole lot to them. I mean, I like the ones that are more complicated and a little more involved. But these, they just kind of amaze me in their simplicity and just how pretty they are. So that one's going to get swung for some trout later on this summer. Fun little fly. That's the apple green. Thanks for watching today. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.